On the 2nd of August, 1100, the King of England and son of the Conqueror was out on a hunting trip with his good noble friends. Out of sheer luck, they find a stag. French archer Walter Tyrrell drew his arrow and took the shot. The arrow ricocheted off the tree and found itself in the lung of the king. The king did not utter a word, but ripped out the arrow from his chest, where he fell to his death. The death of William Rufus, also known as King William II, is a 900-year-old mystery. We still don't know whether Rufus's death was a hunting accident or a murder. In the Chronicle of Kings, written by William of Malmesbury in 1128, he goes on to describe Rufus and his character. He says that Rufus was not loved by the ordinary people, but adored by his fellow soldiers. He wrote down that even the clergy pitied him, for his soul could not be saved. Rufus openly mocked the church and did not care for customs nor traditions. He was money-orientated as he needed funds to fight his upcoming war with his older brother. He was cruel and he was cynical. He was the Conqueror's favourite, but nobody else's. It's because of Rufus's character, people do question whether it was a hunting accident or an assassination. There are 4 main suspects that are often looked at when considering the assassination theory. However, hunting accidents weren't uncommon in the medieval period. In fact, they were very commonplace. However, when considering the assassination theory, most people point the finger to Henry I, his younger brother. Henry was hunting in a different part of the forest at the time. They were in a separate group, and as soon as he heard that his brother had died, he immediately rode to Winchester, secured the treasury and the crown, and became king 3 days later. Rufus was quickly buried, and there was no ceremony. There was also no formal investigation from the crown or the church into Rufus's death. Historians like Frank Barlow suggest that Henry's actions, his quick moves, suggest that he does have a hand in his brother's death. However, other historians will argue that it proves Henry believed it was an accident. Henry and William, growing up, weren't hostile to one another, but they weren't close either. In fact, during their father's reign, they kind of ignored each other until their elder brother Robert sparked a rebellion, and then they made an alliance with one another. So they had some form of a relationship, unlike Henry and his elder brother Robert. Historians like John Gillingham point out that Henry would have just waited for both of his rivals, William and Robert, to have just killed each other, as there was a war imminent between the two. So if Henry really wanted the crown, all he needed to do was wait. Henry was fairly good at kingship. His reign was considered 35 years of peace, and even though his brother Robert kept rebelling because he believed it was his inheritance by birthright, Henry managed to squash any rebellion Robert came up with. He even imprisoned Robert for 28 years until he died in 1134. If anything, he has more of a reason to kill Robert than to keep him alive. So why would he kill Rufus? Maybe it's to show that he is a merciful king and he wouldn't kill his brother. But no one can question the accident narrative now. If he could keep this brother alive, he certainly wouldn't have killed the one that he had an alliance with. But what's even more interesting is that Henry didn't pursue Tyrrell. He never ordered his extradition from France, and he allowed Tyrrell's descendants to keep the lands, but quietly, of course. Tyrrell was known as one of the best archers that France had ever produced. He had a reputation for it. He'd never miss a shot, and he was known to be very, very loyal. What's fascinating is an account written in 1144 by Abbot Sugar of Saint Denis. He notes on Tyrrell's deathbed that he wasn't a part of the hunting party. He never saw the king, and he swore that he never killed him. Tyrrell was framed. That means that there was an assassination plot, and the conspirators pinned the blame on him. So the question is, who were they? Historians point to the De Clare family, which Tyrell was a part of through marriage. The De Clare family were a French noble family who, in Rufus's court, were quite politically stagnant, and they were great supporters of Henry. On the day of the hunting trip, both Gilbert and Robert de Clare were with the king at the time he was shot. That Gilbert gave Tyrell fresh horses to flee from and watched him escape. When Henry becomes king, the De Clares are elevated politically, and essentially they get lands, they get titles, and all these riches in Wales, and Robert, the younger brother, is made steward to Henry. The De Clare family had every reason to want Rufus dead, because they just didn't like him, but they did like Henry. The question is, did Henry know? Did Henry know that the De Clares had an assassination plot? Was he part of it? Or was he completely unaware, therefore believed the De Clares' narrative that it was an accident? And the reason why he never pursued Tyrell? Because he was a part of the De Clare family, although through marriage, leaving Tyrell to live in exile. Perhaps he thought that was a punishment enough. The main suspect, naturally, is Robert. Rufus was the favourite of the Conqueror's children. Robert probably was the least. Even though he was the firstborn son, he was short and stocky, and William the Conqueror took the mick out of him for this. They kind of humiliated him on a daily basis and bullied him for the way he looked. And the name Curthose, which Robert is known as, Robert Curthose, is a direct translation of short and stocky. So they literally gave him a nickname that tormented Robert, and it kind of made him into a very weak man growing up between William, Henry, and Robert. That shows the relationship between the brothers was not healthy at all. There is one occasion known as the chamber pot incident, which is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back for Robert. William and Henry are said to have played dice in this manor lodge, whatever. You know, they're playing dice and they hear the brother Robert come in, and they come up with a plan. Let's pull a prank on him. Gonna run upstairs, wait for him to come underneath the balcony, and then we'll throw the chamber pot over Robert, covering him in urine and excrement. So this was a full chamber pot of bodily fluids. And Robert, furious, as anyone would be, so he starts swinging his sword around, threatening to kill them both, particularly Rufus. So after the chamber pot incident, this leads Robert off a path of rebellion, to the point where there is even a story where Robert meets his father, the Conqueror, on a battlefield, and Robert stabs him in the arm. I think that's it. But essentially, this kind of puts Robert on the outside. He is passed over as heir for the throne, and obviously it's given to Rufus, and it doesn't really end well for Robert, because obviously he spent the last 28 years of his life in prison under his little brother, and he's humiliated over and over and over again. So it seems that Robert has the biggest motive to want Rufus gone, and then of course his little brother. But the problem with Robert being a suspect in the assassination theory is that he wasn't in the country, and because he was perceived as a big man and people kind of looked at him like a clown, he didn't have allies. In the English court, he didn't have anyone to support it. For him to be involved in Rufus's death is highly unlikely, but if anyone's got a motive, it would be Robert. But it just doesn't add up for him to be the perpetrator. In my opinion, I think the De Clare family are the perpetrators, and I don't think this was a hunting accident. However, it does say in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that Rufus was killed by his own men. And this chronicle was written far closer to the time than Malmesbury's account, which is 28 years later. One chronicler saying it was an accident, but the other one saying, no, it wasn't. You can now see why Rufus's death is a mystery and has been for 900 years. But there is another theory that we can't really test. We can't really explain. We just have to kind of go off of our own belief system. And that is, there was a curse. So in fact, there were actually two curses. The first curse is William the Conqueror himself. There are rumours that the Conqueror was cursed at his baptism, and people say that is why he had many attempts on his life, the first one being at the age of 7, and he survived them all. The second curse revolves around William the Conqueror's uprooting and displacement of communities in the New Forest, and it's believed that they had cursed the land, saying that the trees would run with the blood of the sons of William. What's even more interesting is that there is another brother, but this brother had already died before the Conqueror did. He was the second son, and his name was Richard, and he was on a hunting trip where he fell off his horse and he was impaled by a tree. Obviously, we can't test curses, but it is a bit coincidental, isn't it? Another aspect of the curse is the White Ship disaster, which happens in 1120. Henry's heir, his eldest son, William, another William, was coming back from Normandy to England when him and another ship, all noblemen, decided that they were going to race each other back to England. And William's ship snagged a rock in the channel and sunk and drowned. Obviously, this is not in the New Forest, but what if the ship was made from the trees from the New Forest? But again, like I said, it's not like it's concrete, it is all speculation. However, there is a few writers, authors at the time, a Norman monk named Aldrich. He talks about the fact that Rufus was told a premonition the day before from another monk saying that he would die in the New Forest. And obviously Rufus laughed it off. He was like, yeah, okay. So there is that. There is also a note from Aldrich saying that the land had been long accursed by God. Saxon Chronicle, they don't really talk about a curse, but they talk about Rufus's death being retribution for the Conqueror's brutality. It was a way of divine karma. But either way, it is very suspicious and quite odd, no? But again, we don't have any evidence. We just have little notes from monks and a few belief systems being weaved into certain accounts, which is quite fascinating from a Norman monk, Aldrich, because he is Norman, so he would have been Christian. So for him to indulge in pagan-like thinking is quite fascinating because it's just unheard of. I personally believe it was an assassination. I do think the declares had something to do with it. I think Tyrell was framed. Like a hunting accent, it's just too convenient, isn't it? Oh, it's so common. Oh, 900 years. We still don't have answers. And it continues to inspire stories to this day, whether it's Game of Thrones, and I mean Tyrell, the Dance Dragons, House of the Dragon. It's a fascinating piece of history. But I would love to know what you think about all of this, and maybe you might have some suggestions for stories that I should look into. That is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you like the vibe, like and subscribe. If you don't, take care of yourself.